Planes, trains, and automobiles. These days we have many ways to get ourselves around. However, this wasn't always the case. For hundreds of years, the fastest way to travel was by, well, horse. It wasn't until the invention of the locomotive, or trains, that people could travel any faster. Trains revolutionized the world and had a particularly large effect on the United States, which is one of the largest countries in the world. This is why the Transcontinental Railroad is such a big deal. You probably know that the United States is pretty large, but you may not realize how huge it really is. If you wanted to travel from New York City on the East Coast to San Francisco on the West Coast, you would have to travel 2,900 miles. To put that in perspective, the distance between the Terminal Tower and Shaker Square is less than 6 miles, and to go between Cleveland and Columbus, you only need to go 140. Before the Transcontinental Railroad, crossing 2,900 miles could take a year or longer. Even the fastest travelers struggled to make it in less than 6 months. And that was just for people. The best way to move cargo was by using large boats called barges. This is why the oldest cities in America are along the East Coast or connected to lakes and rivers. It was just too hard to move building materials like iron, steel, and stone over large distances. However, this meant that you could only travel to places that you could get to by water. For years, people tried to find a water route across North America using rivers, streams, or even canals, but no matter how hard they looked, they never found one. Trains changed everything. As long as you were willing to build the track, a train could go anywhere you wanted. And while the earliest trains struggled to reach speeds over 20 miles an hour, that was still much faster than a trail horse, who were limited to about 50 miles a day and then needed to rest, eat, and sleep before they could go again. With a crew of engineers, trains could operate for as long as you wanted them to. Of course, trains do have their drawbacks. First, they can only go to where there are railroad tracks. Early companies disagreed on how wide to build the tracks. Making them narrower saved you a lot of money because you didn't need to buy as much land, and narrow tracks were faster to build. Wider tracks, however, were more stable, so a train was less likely to tip over or derail. And derailing is a dangerous problem. To cross the country, trains need to pass through mountains, cross over valleys, and cut through rugged terrain. Constructing railroads was expensive, and it was dangerous work. The railroad companies hired large numbers of immigrants who would be willing to work for less money because it was hard for them to find other jobs. Large numbers of Irish immigrants arrived in the East, and huge waves of Asian immigrants came in from the West. Soon, there were railroad companies on both sides of the country, but there was no single route that you could take to get all the way across. The US government offered financial support to the largest railway companies if they would work together. Some companies built around 100 miles of track, but the Union Pacific Railroad Company built more than 1,000. Because there was already a network of railway lines along the East Coast, this cross-country railroad didn't actually need to go all the way. Instead, it merged with the Eastern Railroad lines in Iowa along the shores of the Missouri River. This gave it access to all the major rail lines to the east, as well as some of the largest river routes as well. On the western end, the Transcontinental Railroad began in Oakland, on Oakland's wharf of San Francisco Bay. Companies worked on both ends, building inwards across the United States. Now, this work was difficult and dangerous, and there were no safety regulations like we have today. This meant that hundreds of workers died, crushed by equipment, injured by dynamite, or simply of dehydration after working all day in the unforgiving sun. But finally, on May 10, 1869, the two ends of the track came together at Promontory Point, Utah. The two ends were joined together with a golden stake, and live accounts of the ceremony were transmitted across the country using telegraphs, making it probably the first ever live broadcast of an event. Now, for the record, that golden stake was later removed with a normal stake made of iron after the ceremony, so don't go looking to dig it up. The Transcontinental Railroad made it possible to cross the length of the United States in 1 week, a fraction of the time it had taken before. It soon became possible to move large amounts of material, allowing new cities to sprout up all across the country. The Wild West became a little less wild, and the United States became a little bit more united. So the next time that you pass by some railroad tracks, you might want to think for a moment about how big an impact they had on the world. Long before cars and planes, it was trains that brought the country together.